Sometimes even the police can't save you. We're raised to believe that in our darkest moments, when terror has its icy grip around our throats, there's always a number we can call, a lifeline to safety, manned by people who will rush to our aid. We place our faith in that system, assuming that, no matter how dire the situation, help is just a few minutes away. But what happens when that faith is misplaced? What do you do when the very people you're supposed to rely on tell you there's nothing they can do, leaving you to face the encroaching darkness all by yourself? Tonight we dive into 3 true stories where help never came. These aren't tales of fiction, crafted to send a simple shiver down your spine. They are harrowing accounts from real people who found themselves trapped in a living nightmare, completely and utterly alone. They reached out for a hand to pull them from the abyss, only to find that the hand wasn't there. The voices on the other end of the line were distant, detached, or worse, powerless. These are stories that explore the terrifying reality that sometimes you are your only line of defense against the horrors that lurk just beyond the light. These are not just stories, they are warnings. They serve as a chilling reminder that the world can be a far more dangerous and unpredictable place than we like to imagine. The safety we take for granted is often just an illusion, a thin veil that can be torn away in an instant. The experiences you are about to hear will stay with you, not because of monsters or ghosts, but because of the terrifyingly human element at their core. They expose the gaping holes in our safety nets and the profound isolation that comes when you realize that no one is coming to save you from the real-life horrors that have found their way to your door. So turn down the lights and prepare yourself. The accounts you are about to hear are deeply unsettling because they are true. They are the collected experiences of individuals who stared into the face of pure dread and were forced to confront it with no backup and no escape. They dialed 911, hoping for salvation, but the only thing they received was the deafening silence of being abandoned to their fate. For them, the nightmare was just beginning, and the authorities who were supposed to be their protectors were nothing more than distant, helpless spectators to the terror that was about to unfold. Clara had just moved into her first apartment, a small one-bedroom on the 3rd floor of an old building. For weeks, she enjoyed the peace and quiet, relishing her independence. The nights were tranquil, the distant hum of the city lulling her to sleep. But everything changed one Tuesday, just after 2 a.m., when her landline rang, jolting her awake. Groggy and confused, she answered, only to be met with absolute silence. No voice, no static, just a chilling empty line. She tried to dismiss it as a glitch, but sleep wouldn't come. The next night it happened again, same time, same silence. Night after night the calls continued, always between 2 and 3 in the morning. Clara became exhausted, her sanctuary now a source of dread. On the 5th night she answered, expecting silence, but this time she heard faint, raspy breathing through the static. Frozen in terror, she whispered, "Who is this?" The only reply was more breathing, until a guttural whisper finally said, "Soon." The line went dead. Clara dropped the phone, heart pounding, the word echoing in her mind. The next morning, desperate, she called the police, but they dismissed her fears, suggesting she change her number. As night fell, Clara realized she was truly alone, the threat now personal and real. That night her cell phone buzzed, an unknown number. She answered, breath held, the same whisper, "I see you." Clara screamed, throwing the phone across the room. She ran to the window, but the street was empty. Still, she felt watched, trapped in her own home, waiting for the next call. Even as a police car passed by, Clara knew, the darkness outside was nothing compared to the terror waiting on the other end of the line. Our next story comes from a man named David, who worked as the live-in superintendent for a small 3-story apartment building in a quiet residential neighborhood. It was an old but well-maintained building, home to a mix of elderly residents and young professionals. David had been the super for over 5 years and knew all the tenants personally. He took pride in keeping the place safe and running smoothly. The community was tight-knit, and serious problems were rare. That all changed the day the apartment directly across the hall from his, Unit 2B, was rented out to a new tenant, a man who called himself Mr. Allister. Mr. Allister was an enigma from the very beginning. He signed the lease and paid his deposit and first month's rent entirely in cash, providing only a post office box for a mailing address and a driver's license that looked worn and slightly faded. He was a tall, gaunt man, probably in his late 50s, with pale skin and deep-set eyes that seemed to absorb all the light in the room. He rarely spoke, and when he did, it was in a quiet, almost inaudible murmur. He moved in with only 2 large, heavy-looking trunks and no other furniture or personal belongings to speak of. David found his behavior odd, but he couldn't exactly deny a tenant who paid his rent on time. From the moment Mr. Allister moved in, a strange atmosphere seemed to settle over the second floor. The hallway, once filled with the faint sounds of televisions and conversation, grew unnervingly quiet. Other tenants on the floor began to comment on it. They never saw Mr. Allister come or go. The only sign he was even there was the occasional sound that would emanate from his apartment late at night. It wasn't music or a television. It was a rhythmic, low-frequency humming noise, a deep, resonant thrum that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards and walls, keeping the other residents on edge. David tried to be a good neighbor and superintendent. He knocked on Mr. Allister's door a few times, once to welcome him to the building and later to ask about the strange humming sound that other tenants had complained about. But no one ever answered. He would stand there, listening at the door, and could hear that same low hum from within, but there was never any other sound. No footsteps, no voice, nothing. The door remained shut, a silent, imposing barrier. Mr. Allister was like a ghost in his own apartment, a presence that was felt but never seen, and the mystery surrounding him was beginning to feel less like an eccentricity and more like a sign of something deeply wrong. As the weeks turned into a month, the strangeness surrounding apartment 2B began to escalate. The humming sound became a nightly occurrence, but it was soon joined by other, more disturbing noises. Tenants would report hearing what sounded like heavy furniture being dragged across the floor in the middle of the night, followed by a loud thud, as if something massive had been dropped. David would go to investigate, but by the time he got to the hallway, the apartment would be completely silent again. His knocks on the door, as always, went unanswered, leaving him with a growing sense of frustration and unease. Then came the smells. A faint, sweet yet deeply unpleasant odor began to seep from under Mr. Allister's door. It was a cloying, chemical-like scent mixed with something organic and decaying. At first, David thought it might be a plumbing issue or perhaps some forgotten garbage. He left a note on the door, politely asking Mr. Allister to contact him about a potential maintenance issue. The note remained on the door for 3 days untouched. The smell, however, grew stronger, becoming so potent that residents on the floor began stuffing towels under their own doors to block it out. The other tenants were becoming genuinely frightened. Mrs. Gable, the elderly woman who lived in 2C, told David she was too scared to leave her apartment after dark. She claimed to have seen strange flickering lights under Mr. Allister's door one night like candlelight and heard a low chanting sound that made her blood run cold. Another tenant, a young man in 2A, swore he heard scratching sounds coming from inside the walls that bordered Mr. Allister's unit. A frantic, persistent scratching that would last for hours before abruptly stopping. The second floor was no longer just quiet. It was tense, filled with a palpable sense of dread. David knew he had to do something. The complaints were piling up, and his own instincts were screaming that something was terribly wrong across the hall. The combination of the sounds, the overwhelming stench, and the complete disappearance of the tenant himself was beyond strange. He used his master key to try and open the door, thinking he needed to perform a wellness check, but he found that a heavy-duty deadbolt, one he hadn't installed, had been fitted on the inside. He was locked out. His mysterious tenant had fortified the apartment, and whatever was happening inside was now completely sealed off from the outside world. With the overpowering stench and the newly installed internal lock, David's concern turned to genuine alarm. The smell was now reminiscent of something biological and decomposing, and his mind immediately went to the worst-case scenario. Mr. Allister could be dead inside his apartment. His hands shaking slightly, David called the police to request a wellness check. He carefully explained the situation to the dispatcher. The tenant hadn't been seen in over a month. A foul odor was emanating from the unit, and he was unable to gain entry due to an unauthorized lock. He expected them to share his sense of urgency. 2 officers arrived about 30 minutes later. David met them in the hallway, which now reeked of the sweet, chemical decay. The officers wrinkled their noses as they approached apartment 2B. David explained the situation again, pointing out the untouched note on the door and describing the strange sounds and the tenant's bizarre behavior. One of the officers knocked loudly on the door. "Police department, is anyone in there? We're here for a wellness check." Our final story comes from Clara, who thought she'd found peace in a quiet suburban town, living alone in her grandmother's old house. For months, her home was a sanctuary, until the feeling of being watched crept in. It started small. A garden gnome turned to face the street, a wind chime laid on the mat, a potted plant moved. Nothing was stolen or broken, but Clara sensed a message, a chilling announcement that someone could get close. She tried to rationalize it, maybe kids, maybe the wind, but deep down she knew it was something else. Then, a fresh boot print appeared beneath her kitchen window. Fear tightened in her chest. Someone had stood just feet away, watching. At night she heard scratching on the siding, no trees nearby, just the sound and her pounding heart. Clara called the police. They were polite but dismissive, suggesting a security camera. She installed one, hoping for peace. For a week, nothing happened. Then, at 3:14 a.m., her phone buzzed. The footage showed a hooded man, tall and broad-shouldered, walking confidently to her porch. He pressed his palm to her window, leaving a greasy print, a claim of ownership. The police could do little. Clara felt trapped, haunted by the handprint and the faceless figure. Days later, her neighbor mentioned a handyman, tall, broad, always in a dark hoodie, working late in the garage across from Clara's window. The realization hit. The stalker wasn't a stranger in the shadows, but someone hiding in plain sight, right across the street. Clara was completely, terrifyingly on her own. The stories you've heard tonight are a chilling testament to a terrifying reality. Sometimes, the systems we trust to protect us are rendered powerless. Whether it's a threat that defies explanation, a danger that hides behind a veil of normalcy, or an enemy that operates just outside the narrow confines of the law, the outcome is the same: a profound and terrifying sense of isolation. The characters in these stories learned the hard way that when you dial for help, and no one can answer in a meaningful way, the silence on the other end of the line is the most frightening sound in the world. It's the sound of you being truly alone with the monster at your door. These accounts force us to confront an uncomfortable truth about the world. We build our lives on a foundation of perceived safety, believing that there are rules, that there are protectors, that there is always someone to call when the darkness begins to creep in. But what happens when that foundation cracks? What do you do when the person you report is dismissed as a prankster, when the evidence you provide isn't enough, when the danger is so close and yet so invisible to everyone but you? It is in these moments that the true horror of a situation is realized. It's not just the threat itself, but the soul-crushing realization of your own helplessness against it. The fear in these narratives doesn't just come from the stalker, the caller, or the unseen presence. It comes from the chilling clarity that you are your own and only line of defense. The police can't guard your mind against psychological torment, and they can't station an officer on your doorstep indefinitely to watch for a phantom. The true horror is the slow erosion of your sanity and your sense of security, the knowledge that you must face the unknown by yourself, armed with nothing but your own wits and courage. It's a lonely, desperate fight for survival in a world that has turned its back. Remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones where no one comes to save you. They are the stories that remind us that the ultimate responsibility for our safety can, in the blink of an eye, fall squarely and solely upon our own shoulders. The world can be a dangerous place, and the deepest, most primal fears are often realized not in the presence of a monster, but in the absence of a savior. If you have a story where help never came, share it in the comments below. Your experience might serve as a warning or simply a comfort to others who have found themselves utterly and completely alone in the dark.